When thinking about art activism, or activism in general, it is a common assumption that starting or contributing to a nonprofit can act as a surefire way to advance allyship, when in truth, the reality of the politics involved in these nonprofits can at times do more harm than good. This isn't to say that nonprofits should be abolished, but rather that their policies deserve to be held accountable by those they claim to serve. Insight, Women, Gender, Non-Conforming, and Trans People of Color Against Violence was founded as a conglomerate of radical feminists of color committed to advancing anti-violence movements in the U.S. In 2004, Insight held a conference of the same name with the goal of collectively brainstorming alternatives through and around the nonprofit industrial complex. The Revolution Will Not Be Funded is the collection of talks presented at that conference. Before even the need for these talks can be understood, however, it must first be explained what the nonprofit industrial complex is and is not, and who it does and does not serve. This video offers a summary and overview of this systemic dilemma as explained by Insight in their books Forward and Introduction. To understand the role of the nonprofit industry, we must first address the effects of increased neoliberalism, aka anti-big government rhetoric, on modern-day social welfare policy. Classist and racist effects of neoliberalism include the deregulation of labor and trade and the protection of the wealth of our nation's most elite citizens at the expense of actively cutting and dismantling of widespread social welfare programs, specifically to peoples of color. In an attempt to hide and legitimize these actions, advocates of neoliberalism sometimes spout harmful stereotypes like the welfare queen to blame and scapegoat poor people of color for their own impoverished conditions. Nonprofits skyrocketed as a result in an attempt to fulfill these basic needs being denied to so many. This decrease in government intervention has led to an increase in the privatization of essential life-giving services like health and education, often in the form of these nonprofits. This has exacerbated the racial education gap. Rather than reinvesting monies into schools, however, the U.S. has instead seen rise in the massive expansion of systems of policing and imprisoning. In other words, not only has the switch to privatization contributed to soft control in the form of the burden of debt, but it's also quite literally stolen the opportunity for an education from millions in the form of incarceration. The truth of the matter is that nonprofits would not exist if we only held our government accountable to maintaining fair, equal opportunities to things like housing, employment, and education. And while their real day-to-day offerings and provisions for the very real needs of the individuals they serve are invaluable, they also do very little to treat the core of the disease, doing more to pacify than to fuel the necessary revolution. Another relevant perspective in discussing nonprofit reform is the experiences of the employees of these organizations themselves. As these organizations lose funding, those employed by them often work at increasingly unpaid capacities while using their own homes or donated spaces. In this way, employees of these agencies often bear the brunt of the labor, working to act as a bridge between their employers and the communities they serve. This is relevant because nonprofit leadership often relies on the private, self-perpetuating board of trustees or directors, rather than listening to seasoned activists from within the community. This is intentional. It is not in the best interest of the board to fight for long-lasting systemic change that would criticize the inequalities associated with capitalism. The goals of these individuals and companies in power is not to create a world wherein each person has the agency to provide for themselves, but rather to mask their own criminal accumulation of wealth through publicly giving back to the misfortunate. It's like giving your brother a piece of chocolate to make your mom happy, when in reality the only reason you have the chocolate in the first place is because you stole his birthday cake. They give a little so they won't receive backlash for how much they've gotten away with taking in the first place. Herein lies the basis of any industrial complex. The state and business elites using their shared relationship to create positive economic prosperity for themselves while using their limited philanthropic deeds to influence and limit the fight of social movements towards any real equality. Furthermore, it isn't a secret that when wealthy individuals create foundations, they qualify for major tax breaks on that wealth. To the unscrutinizing eye, it may appear that a corporation is engaging in providing quality economic relief, when in reality, they are merely providing their employees with a tiny fraction of what has been earned in untaxed profits by the exploitation of the very citizens they are pretending to serve. In summary, to create long-lasting change, the goals of nonprofits must be to support movements rather than to sustain the nonprofits themselves. Some assert that this can only be attained through organizations being funded through their constituents rather than wealthy outsiders and by extension, operating as an autonomous movement. Opinions on how best to enact these revisions differ between those engaged in the movement, thus illustrating the necessity of this book. Hey, I'm Erin. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of this video. I am a theater and puppet artist based in Philadelphia. Just saying that because I am not an organizer and I'm clearly not connected with Insight. I have just heard reference to this book through a lot of different people and realized that I couldn't find very helpful summaries on understanding it, which led me to creating this video. Please subscribe and like if you enjoyed this video, and I will make more parts about some of the talks that happen later. Have a good day!